everybody back in now, please. We'd like to get started. We're running a little late. We're not going to go over though before lunch. We're going to cut this short. Should I tweet while we're up here?
I know. Last night I tweeted and I transposed my hashtag.
I don't know what that means.
Okay, I think we'll start our session. We have a panel up here, and this session's topic is alternative education. We all work together. Last year when the board was trying to come up with ideas for presentations, a couple of us work at alternative schools, and we thought, why not do a session on that? So that's what we're going to do. My name is Lori Larson. I teach at the Youth Correctional Center in Mandan. I've been there 2 years only. Prior to that, I was at a Christian school in town, Shiloh Christian, for 17 years. And you may say, wow, that is quite a switch. And yes, it is, and yet it's not. When Maggie, I think it was coming with the ideas or Heather, for ideas, if you could write a book about education, what would it be titled? And I put, from Christian to criminal, students really need the same thing. So, I have learned a lot, and in part to my principal, she's on the panel here, Penny, and she'll be talking in just a moment. We also have Corey and Maggie and Laura, who all, Corey still works at South Central, and Maggie and Laura did work at South Central here in Bismarck. And so that's a little bit different alternative education than where I work. And some of you are from Fargo, Woodrow Wilson, Grand Forks has an alternative school. And then Penny too will talk just a little bit about the difference in, for example, YCC compared to South Central, compared to Prairie Learning Center, compared to Boys and Girls Ranch, all of those different alternative settings. And many of you teachers, hats off. I certainly didn't realize when I took my job at YCC the great demands on public educators. Classroom of 30 kids, you know, you have the one that maybe is being sent to YCC the next week, and you're trying to reach him plus the other 29. And so I definitely have the advantage at YCC of more individualized, small classroom, that kind of thing, compared to when you have a classroom size and the discipline issues and that kind of thing. So we're just going to talk about some of that. Penny's going to fill you in on YCC, but first we're going to have the panel introduce themselves a little better than I did.
Okay. Hello, my name is Penny Heddletwin, and I serve as the principal of schools for the North Dakota prison system, the Corrections and Rehabilitation Department. And so that means that my office is out at Youth Correctional Center, but we're one department, and we serve youth and adult. And so that means I also oversee educators at the penitentiary and James River Correctional Center, which is our medium security prison, as well as Missouri River Correctional Center, which is our minimum security prison. Lots of C's in our acronyms. I am going to give us an entry to exit on YCC and what that really means for the students that you send to us. But first, we'll meet our diplomats up here.
Hi, I'm Corey Volk. My wife is Annie Volk, and I do have to tell this story really quick because I might not get a chance to. We used to teach in the same school, and that was really cool when we were in Garrison together. Small school, we had all the same students. Now we're in great big schools, and we're in different parts of town, and we don't share all the same commonalities. But the best part of our sharing is we had this student, and I believe it was 9th grade, and she had 9th grade English the hour before I had 9th grade science. And this guy was like, he was like the 9th grade real life version of Alan from The Hangover. Like, didn't have a filter, said whatever he thought, was kind of smart, but just really didn't understand the social intricacies of the real world. And he obviously got in trouble in English a lot, and was always in the doghouse with Mrs. Volk, and he came to my classroom immediately after being in trouble for something, and he plopped down and he looked at me and he said, "What did you marry Mrs. Volk for?" And I was like, oh geez, what's this guy getting at? So I go, "I don't know, I love her, I guess." He looks at me and goes, "Huh, you could do better." So I immediately just got on the phone. I was like, Annie, you won't believe what this guy just said. And it was funny and fun, but as everybody knows, I could not do better. And
his English grade went down a bit.
You're lucky you're with me and I'm still with you.
Agreed. I am also a football coach, and to use a football analogy, I out-punt my coverage with Annie, definitely.
Okay. I am Maggie Townsend, and I just spent the last year at South Central High School as one of the 2 English teachers. And before we get started, I just wanted to share a paraphrase Ken Robinson quote. "Alternative education is meeting the student where they are with what they need." And he said, "Why isn't that education?"
I am Laura Wagner, and I round out the rest of the English department at South Central. I spent 3 years there, and I'm going to PHS and Century next year.
I feel so wrong sitting. Can I stand?
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
So my rendition is just letting you know a little bit about what happens when your students end up coming clear to the big house, so to speak. She is handing out a handout that's actually our biennial report. We don't have a school board. Our school board is our legislators. We are considered a government agency, and so I want to talk to you a little bit about the ins and outs of YCC, but first, I think a lot like Maggie, vicariously I've learned about your character through your husband in my classes, and one of the things that I would relate back is we often think of Frederick Langbridge's quote about, 2 prisoners look through the bars, one sees mud, the other sees stars. And so our goal is that our average length of stay for our students is so unpredictable, and it varies from student to student, that we have to really strive to offer the best education that we can to all of your students while we have them. Last year we served 166 school districts, and there's 190 approved schools in North Dakota. Those 166 school districts were in all North Dakota schools, of course. We do have some federal contracts with other states. There are several other states that are learning that it's not wise to send your 16 and 17 and 18-year-old felons in with the adults of 40 and 50 and 60 years. And so until some of their planning can change, we also offer those services to some other states, primarily South Dakota. But one of the things that I wanted to share with you first is that our vision is simple. It's a successful reentry for every student. And every student comes into us so individualized that is one of the things, as Lori was talking, we tease her that we're shocking the Shiloh out of her. But it's one of the things that we have to really focus on, because our students are coming in with varied backgrounds. They're coming in with varied academic experiences. Most of them are coming in with reading symptoms. They're coming in as 15 and 16-year-olds reading at 2nd grade. And so a lot of our programming has to be impactful. One of the things that Lori does for us is composition, and we've learned that many of our students, like in reading, they can't write well, and then that cripples them into the other things that they need to do. If you think about no matter where they're at academically, whether it's a high school diploma path that they're going to take or a GED path that they will take from us, they need to be able to write, and they need to be able to problem solve. And reading and writing, as an English teacher, which I forgot to tell you, but I see a lot of familiar faces. Before I was the locked up lady, I was in public school for 15 years teaching English. And so I see some speech coach fellows out there. But, that higher order thinking is where we need our students to be. And of course, it's in all of the core areas, but reading and writing fundamentally doesn't allow them to get into occupations. And so it's a big focus, and it's an ongoing school improvement that will never go off the radar for us. So with that said, a couple of things that I wanted to share with you is that the Youth Correctional Center is an accredited elementary, middle school, and high school. So we have to do all the things that public school does regarding accreditation. We have to do all of the neglected and delinquent reports. We're considered a school-wide Title I school. So we offer all of those different things. The difference really between public school and us, besides the obvious that our students come and go, however, as you're all impacted with oil-filled and transient locations, guess what? We have that in common more so now than we used to. But other than that, it's just that we're not a local education agency. So we're not getting foundation aid. Once those students come to us from you all, you keep your foundation aid, and our legislators figure out what we need for our budget. So that's primarily one of the biggest differences. With us not being an LEA though, your school still owns their special education plan, their ELL plan, all of those things. But we have to, just like any student that's coming into your school district, we have to make sure that plan is updated, that it's followed. If their educational services change and they end up having to be in the building for school versus in our school for school, based on their choices. Life is all about choices and where those choices end up putting that student within their education realm. Regardless of those things, we have to update, renew, and offer some recommendations. In addition to that, our education students come in on a couple of different levels. They come in as timeout, and timeout could be from your school district. It could have been from a lesser restrictive placement where they just needed a little bit of a wake-up call. That is the timeout system. Detention is similar. Timeout can hold them at our place for a little bit longer than detention, but they come in basically for the same reasons. Something within their choices and their programming isn't going well in their current placement, so they come to us for a little bit of a rejuvenation of a wake-up call, and then they go back out, hopefully on their merry way, to be successful. When that doesn't happen, they return to us, and they'll come to us on what's called an assessment status. And so any student, I can't hold that, can't talk without my hands, that's that speech coach in me. The assessment status is any student that comes into court. And so they come out to us for 21 days. And through that 21 days, there's a battery of assessments that we send those students through, not only academic, but criminogenic. And so we're trying to figure out their criminal thinking. We're trying to come up with what their thinking errors are, what's going to be the best placement. Because straight up, even though job security is for our house to be full, unfortunately, our business is always good. And so we want that student to be in the least restrictive placement as possible. And that means that if they don't belong at YCC, we don't want them there. If they're a low-risk student, we want to get them placed out somewhere that we can offer the programming that they need, but in a way that's not as restrictive as our placement. That doesn't get much more restrictive than where we're at. And so with that thinking, you know, the higher risk student that's already making some of those pretty, big choices, unhealthy choices, and a high-risk offender. If you have the high-risk offender and the low-risk offender, that low-risk offender will always go up just through attrition of environment, as we often say, product of the environment, but that high-risk offender tends not to go down without a great deal of programming. And so that's the piece around assessment. After the 21 days, though, if the thinking is through all of the assessment and through our cohorts in the community, our DJS, Division of Juvenile Services, which would be kind of like the probation officer that we would think of for the youth, they become our treatment students. And through treatment, they would be with us. Average length of stay right now is about 150 days. A year ago, it was 120 days. So they become our treatment student for that amount of time, and we work on their programming. And it's exit upon entry is what we're thinking. And so that's when we identify if they need grief and loss, if they need gang affiliation type of programming, if they need chemical and adult programming, you know, chemical abuse, alcohol and drugs, if they need pre-sex offender treatment, whatever the case may be. And sometimes they're tried as adults. I will address it before it's asked, since it hit the front page of the Tribune. And sometimes the students that make the poor choices and they're underage, even if they're tried as an adult, they will be served with us at the Youth Correctional Center until the age of 18, because that's our century code of where we would serve our students who are convicted felons. So that's an example of how education is in the 4 ways that they come, and their schooling differs. On timeout detention status as well as assessment status, we work with the homeschool. They're there for 21 days. So where are you from? West Fargo. So West Fargo brings a student, that's happened, and West Fargo sends a student my way, and so on that 21 days, we want to make sure that whatever class, English, that she is teaching that student, we'll call him John, okay? Whatever classes John needs, she would be sending back and forth with our coordinator, because the thought at that point within assessment is that there's a good chance that they'll go back to their home school. So then we're a facilitator of education. There are some times, though, that some of our students are frequent from certain geographical locations in North Dakota, and they know us well and know what we do, and so sometimes they'll just say, John is working on fractions, and this is where we've been, and then we just pick up with our own curriculum, and we start them there until we know whether that student's going to be treatment. So we leave that up to the homeschool, but primarily we work with the homeschool schoolwork, say that fast, and then once they become treatment, then it's our schoolwork for that amount of time. So we're fully accredited then, elementary, middle school, and high school, because we serve ages 12 to 20, sometimes as young as 11, depending on the offense, but that means a 6th grader from time to time, or 4 this last year. Other than that, transcripts are a big piece of how we fill in the blanks. As you can imagine, a lot of our students come from a lot of your schools, and sometimes a lot of your schools all in the amount of their high school career. And so we piece together their transcripts to figure out where they're missing certain things. It's amazing what you might find where they might have passed half of English 10, but not the other half, but they have a full credit of English 11, because somewhere in the mix of it all. And so that's one of the things that is a benefit of our school, that schedule changes are every Monday. And so Lori, along with the rest of the staff, 20 good people out there, that they have to learn to roll with it and be pretty flexible, because you'll get a new student every week, you'll lose a student every week, so to speak. And so with that then, if we recognize that that student has English 11 but missed half of English 10, that's where he might be, and he might have 2 classes where he's doing English 10 and English 12, because we have that much flexibility within our scheduling to offer that. And I don't know what the reason is, besides there's a lot of us out there that are English majors. So that is really my piece, I think, for right now, and then Q&A at the end, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so South Central High School is the alternative school here in Bismarck. This is my 3rd year with the alternative school, and I know some of the history. I think we're looking at our 30th anniversary this fall from when they opened the doors. The name South Central comes from, at one time they serviced sort of this South Central region, and you could get students from some of the smaller towns in the area that would come in as well. When I showed up on the first day, we were still picking up 10 Mandan kids a year, plus all our Bismarck kids. And now Mandan's got their own program, and we're just servicing Bismarck kids or kids that have mailboxes in Bismarck and live other places. That happens too. Last school year, no, 2 school years ago, we did a survey and we asked a bunch of questions to find out about our student population a little bit, and I think it gave us some really good insight as to who they are and what we should be doing. And like everything that works well and is a good idea in education, we quit doing it. I don't know why, but at least we got a good snapshot of some things that maybe could answer some questions. We asked them why they were coming, and they could pick like from a menu of about 8 different things of why they felt they were coming to South Central. And the number one by and far reason students were coming to South Central is they didn't have enough credits for their grade level. And that could be because they're failing classes, Or it could be they've moved so many times in their life that they've got a bunch of holes. I can't tell you how many kids we get that are 17 years old and they have like 3 credits. It's impossible to graduate at that pace, anywhere, even at South Central, let alone go to one of the traditional high schools. The number 2 reason is they have attendance issues, and that's like our 300-pound gorilla that we deal with all the time. They don't come to class regular, and they have problems because they're not in class regular, and that makes it really hard. Their number 3 reason was they had bad grades, and the number 4 reason was they needed to finish high school at a faster pace than they would at a traditional high school. And that ends up being our teen parents who they're either having a hard time swinging daycare issues, or they're like, right at the end of their senior year and they're anticipating having this baby and it's impossible to get everything done and still graduate in May. So they come to South Central. We get a lot of those students. So the programming that we set up then, most classes are student-paced. We still teach the Bismarck curriculum as best we can. And I can't speak for every class, and the English teachers maybe could be a little bit more intelligent on their issue than I can, but I can speak for you for science. I go to all the science district meetings, and it's really hard because we do breakdown by subject. So there's a biology group and a chemistry group and a physics group, and I teach all of those, so I have to kind of keep up with everybody, but I also have to kind of work and contribute some effort towards one of the main groups. So I sit on the applied biochem group a lot, but I also sneak into the other groups so I know what's going on so that I can make sure that my curriculum is hitting the right areas. But then it's student-paced, and the way I set it up for my classroom, I had to take a class right before I came to Bismarck, and I read something about some lady who taught 8th grade science, and what she did is she set up these menus, and the kids had to get so many points by doing so many things from the menu, and they were all the activities. You could do a traditional quiz, or you could do this lab or that lab, or you could do an internet thing. So I just kind of built that same scenario. I just took every curriculum and I chunked it into what I like is 10 units, and then each unit's got a menu of core things. There's a C worth of material, so an 83% I guess is what you would hit if you did the core, and then there's all the extras that you can do if you choose. And then that works out really well because at South Central we have this policy where you can't finish a class early unless you have a B average. So the only way you can get a B in my science classroom is to do some extras from time to time, and I'll have kids that'll finish and they'll go, I'm done, and I'll go, no you're not, we got to do some more things, we got to earn some more points so that you can get yourself checked off, and then you can go on. So we do have that option with students. They can finish early, and we do have some students that do finish early, but the student pacing really helps the students with the bad attendance issues. Students who are gone maybe 2 days a week, or maybe they're there with really good attendance and then something happens and then they're just gone for 10 days, and then you're about ready to send the note home, try to get your textbook back, and then they show up and then they're there, and then you just pick them up where they left off. And we try to finish every kid's semester in 42 days, and that was kind of weird. It took me a long time to get used to because I did like a week of school, and I remember sitting on my first week in the staff room at lunch, and I said, what am I supposed to do with these kids? They just keep showing up. At what point do I try to get them on pace with everybody? And the lady looked at me. She was the English teacher before, Maggie, and she said, you don't. They just keep coming all year. And I go, what? All year? And that's really the way it is. Last school year, I serviced 139 science students, and if I want to remember right, I had 15 on the first day. And they come and they go and they finish and they go do something else, and then they come back, and it's that's South Central.
One thing I just want to make sure to mention, our experience, Laura and Corey and mine, is all South Central High School, and each alternative school in the state is set up very differently. Some are like one-room schoolhouse concepts, some have different attendance policies. They're all very different. But one thing I really want to stress to you, that if you want to make friends with your alternative schools, recognize the alternative schools. I I can't say the number of times that we are left out. We're the ugly stepchild that nobody talks about. And it hurts our students' feelings too, I think. I think back to just this spring. There was an article in the Bismarck Tribune, a little infographic with all the area graduations and times and places, and South Central was not listed on there. And we're just like everybody else. We're not GED. You get a high school diploma, and I have to tell a little story. I was at a library workshop type thing a couple weeks ago, and this lady said, "Oh, a colleague of mine is going to the Jamestown Alternative School, and that's going to be just wonderful for her because she can't handle teaching the Common Core." And I looked at her and said, we teach the Common Core just like you do. And I think that's something very important to keep in mind with your alternative schools. But we'll have Laura, and then we'll have questions, I think.
I've made a lot of connections, and I attribute that a lot to having taught at an alternative school. And it's just such a small department of two, and I've been really fortunate with my coworkers. But so I want to thank the people who have helped me. I appreciate the people in other schools and other places that have helped. So another way to make friends with your alternative school teachers is to reach out to them and ask them if they need any resources, because sometimes it's hard to find those in a small department. The way that I've tried to teach my English classes that have been most helpful for me, because my students are all over the place and they come and they go and they're working on different things, is the workshop approach. And I strongly believe in that, not only for alternative education, but also for regular English classrooms, and giving students a lot of choice and independent reading, and encouraging them to become readers. I tried really hard, Maggie and I both did, to find one book that kids would connect with. And I felt like if we could do that, kids would go on and read other things, and so we worked really hard on that. So those are the things I have to say.
I'll jump in here with the books because there was I was in on the other session, and I heard somebody say something about the science literacy and things like that, and I have all these books that I've read that are on my shelf, and I'll borrow them out. If I make a connection, I'll go, oh, this kid, he'll really get a kick out of this, he'll like this book, he'll really find this interesting. For me, that's like the kiss of death. As soon as I borrow that book to that kid, I know I will never see that kid again, ever. And I've probably done it 10 times where I've given them a book, and then they just disappear. So I don't know if it's the book or if it's bad luck, but I just know that's the way it always goes at South Central.
But I always feel good at least to have one book somewhere.
They do, they do.
Pay it forward. One of the things that I was just going to piggyback on that is, when you were saying make friends with your alternative high schools, I think too it's a misunderstanding sometimes of what can happen. You don't get a lot of information either as you're sending students, or when your students disappear and when they come back. And so I think that too makes it difficult and makes a bit of it harder to gap that bridge. But one of the things that we're going to do this fall at the Youth Correctional is we're going to talk at the school board and the administrators conferences to disseminate some of that information back down. Because like at the Youth Correctional Center, for an example, we do a full withdrawal packet, and that withdrawal packet has their transcripts, all of the accommodations, all of the things that we tried with strategies within the classrooms that were successful with that student. All of those things are put into one packet and then sent to their receiving school. And there's so much of that information that you could glean, but sometimes it ends up going on the counselor's desk or the business manager's desk, or every school is so different that it doesn't always get disseminated down to the folks that really need it as they're trying to work with John. And so I think that's the second battle too, is not only making faces and names and links, but to figure out who should be the receiving person within those areas so that you get John's information to best serve John.
All right, so we will do question and answers. I guess I'll run around with this. Is that what they want me to do, maybe? Does that work?
That works.
Okay, so anybody have any questions for anyone or insight to share?
Yay.
Instant outsider question. Is alternative school, does that just mean one thing, or are those all different kinds of schools?
A little late.
Came a little late, and I'm not from
Okay. I'll tackle, and then if you guys want to tackle too. So the alternative schools mean a lot of different things in North Dakota because there's GED centers around the state of North Dakota. There's alternative learning high schools all around North Dakota. There's private and public schools. And then there's the Youth Correctional Center, which is who I'm representing right now. And so depending on the student's story, because they're all the authors of their own story, so to speak, depends on where they'll end up going. They're not in an incarcerated mode or on a probationary mode necessarily to go to the alternative high school setting, which they'll speak to. However, there's some that are still on DJS and still on probation that they will serve. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but there's lots of step-down facilities, and a lot of those facilities are step-down or step-up to us, depending on which part of the path they're on.
She nailed it. Yes. You hold the mic.
Yeah, this morning Jeremy's presentation on that flipped classroom, that seemed like that would really work well for your situation. I will say I have mixed feelings about it myself. I think that the learning environment, it's this interchange between the teacher and the student, and giving them, like say if you're doing the figurative language, poetry terms, anything, so telling them what a simile is, giving them an example, doesn't mean they're going to do that. And there's something kind of being able to do it. It's the activity you have them do. And sometimes I never teach it the same way twice. I never do. I don't want to. I want that living moment to find the metaphors when we go through the similes and the hyperboles, to be kind of drawn for the moment of that time, you know, from like the Trayvon Martin and the Zimmerman thing. We'll draw something from that. So I think I like the, you know, just kind of worried about that flip one. But as soon as I heard you guys talk, they're coming and going, you know, something like that where they could repeat it, go back and look at that lesson, and you wouldn't have to keep going over that. You'd have it on file. That seems like that would work good. Are you using something like that now?
That's the biggest problem I felt internally. My struggle has been to create a learning experience for my students where they can interact with each other, but it's so hard when they're all in different places. So I've thought about flipping my classroom, but I have struggled to do it consistently. Maggie and I were just talking that it would be hard to send that home with students. We at South Central kind of have a no homework policy. Kids can take things home if they want to, but we lose a lot of stuff. And even if they do take things home and bring it back, lots of times it doesn't get done, which is probably a situation that everyone faces. But I think it would be good to create that like consistent engagement and like consistent instruction, because I have a hard time myself making sure that I tell each kid the same thing and feel good about how I did that.
I think we're similar at the Youth Correctional Center too. Those students get wake-up call at 6 o'clock and they get lights out at 9, and we own them from 8:30 to 3:15, and then after 3:15 is when they also have to do their cognitive restructuring groups and different things like that. So although I love the concept of the flipped classroom, I think you nailed it in the instructional piece that you were describing there. You know, any brain researcher will say you front load some of that information so that it's already a common learning before the students know that it's a common learning. And so I think that folks in their setting become pros at front loading some of the materials that they're having their students learn as the students are starting to be introduced, but to have it be where it's on their own to come back in for a big, deeper project-based learning makes it really difficult, because our classrooms are the same in that they might have 10 or 12 students in there, but those 10 and 12 students might be at 12 different levels of English, needing 12 different lessons at any one given time. We have been striving to give pure classrooms to our teachers out at YCC, which isn't an easy undertaking, but even with that, if you have 5 algebra kids, those 5 algebra kids are in 5 completely different areas within Algebra 1, for instance. So that's really what makes it tough.
I
teach at an alternative high school in Grand Forks, a community high school, and I do have flipped sections of my class. And I just put it on my website, and it's really convenient because I do have 15 different kids at different places, and it's all one-on-one teaching. You can have kids go and look at a lesson or whatever it is that you're talking about, comedian like satire or something like that. And then you go back to that student and you talk to them and you teach them one-on-one and you get information from them and feedback from them one-on-one what they thought about it. And then you go on and you have them do the assignment or whatever it is that they're going to be doing. But that way you get insight into what their thought process is and stuff like that. I found it to be really helpful, especially in Grand Forks we have 6 blocks. So it's 6 segments of the school year that we've divided our school year into. So I don't have to say the same thing, for the classroom rules and procedures. That's all flipped. And so then they listen to it, and I don't have to repeat myself, 95 times, the same information. Another thing about alternative education is it's not just the bad kids that go to the alternative education. It's kids who are square pegs that don't fit into the circle and into the holes that we try to pound them into. We get a lot of kids at my school who come because of medical issues. They've missed too much time at Central or Red River, and so then they need to come to our school to not make up the time, but to have a place where we're a little bit more flexible. And we can accommodate their needs a little bit better than the traditional high school, because then they would just get left behind, which makes sense. We also have kids who have school phobias, and that's a huge thing. A lot more prevalent than I think most people here think and realize. And the other thing is kids who just can't handle 7 classes at once. Our day is separated into 2 class periods, one 3-hour block in the morning and a 3-hour block in the afternoon. And we have the same policy, no homework policy. And it really works for kids to be able to concentrate their time and their efforts. And does that mean that they work the entire time? Absolutely not. But it gives them more time to concentrate on one subject at a time than having to go 50 minutes, 50 minutes, 50 minutes.
You said you worked really hard on finding a book that would speak to your students at the alternative school, not the YCC, or what, I can't remember what it was. But we were just wondering what the book was.
No, they hated streetcars. I think it was too old-fashioned for them. But Alan Hopkins is a favorite of our students. And what was the nonfiction one then? You just tell the story of him.
Well, Maggie and I kind of tagged team on one kid that we felt was a success in the end. He told me, I don't know what he told Maggie, but that his favorite book was Green Eggs and Ham. And I always ask kids, like, have you ever read a book that you liked? And that kid read Green Eggs and Ham. And then I ask them if they've watched movies that they've liked, and I kind of try to go from there, and I try to read as many books as I can to come up with as many ideas for them as I can. He started, did he read?
He read Streetcars and hated it.
He read Streetcars, and then what was the first book he did? I think you found it for him. He ended up reading Tweak
and all those Ellen Hopkins. And
Ellen
I
Hopkins
think
books.
between November and May he read, is it 8 books?
Yeah, I think so.
8 books. And he claimed he had never read a book since 3rd grade. And he became a parent. And I think that's one of the things we taught him was the importance of literacy and reading to your child. And on top of that, one of the things we established at South Central at the end of the year was a children's library for our alternative kids to check out books to take home to their little ones. And we fought the system and won with interlibrary loan and our students not being able to check out books because we don't have a great return rate. And the librarians were not very helpful with that sometimes. And we would get overdue notices from like 2nd grade that we were supposed to give these kids, and we're like, oh. And the overdues was a challenge. And this kid, I think we started checking the books out for him in our name and secretly giving them to him and like breaking all these rules. But as the great Corey Vogt told me, you're not alternative unless you're breaking at least one rule a day. But Ellen Hopkins was that, and then there's a nonfiction, what was that guy's name? Oh, David Sheff or something?
I think it's Nick Sheff, and
That
then
Nick
his
Sheff.
dad wrote a book
Yep.
called Beautiful Boy, and that might be David. I'm not sure. Books about drugs seem to be really successful. But I work really hard to individually find a book for a kid. And a lot of times they are hesitant to give up on books, and I don't know why that is, but I look at them, and when they're not turning any pages, I say, if you hate this, let's go find something else. So I try really hard individually to find something that connects with a kid for whatever reason.
It's Gillian Flynn. Gillian Flynn was another popular author this last year.
And I try to sell them as being kind of like edgy books, like this is the creepiest book I've ever read. And sometimes that works pretty well.
And then I had one other question. At YCC, are there safety issues in your classrooms?
You know, I will answer it, but I think the best person to answer that is right behind you as one of the teachers on the front line. But I will say I started there as a teacher. Ahead of becoming a principal there, I started there as a read-write trainer and ran the reading program. And although there's times where they make poor choices in the classroom and it's your job to redirect them, no different than in public school, I would be really hard-pressed at this point in my career to go back to public school because I can teach from bell to bell. We get a lot of great support from the cottages, and so once they get to school, it's a privileged experience. And so truly, I'm not dealing with the cell phones and the other things. The flipped classroom, part of the reason, no connectivity. So, you know, I mean, that's one of the hurdles that we can't have, but I could see your point that it would be super, that's a super way for you to do that. But Lori, maybe you should talk about how you feel.
I have never felt afraid, I'll just say that, ever. And no discipline problems that I've encountered yet. I mean, I know that could happen, but I just know I have a lot of support around me. And if a kid gets very agitated or upset by anything, they can take a time out, and that really seems to work well, and we're all kind of trained to deal with that. So no, I've never ever felt afraid.
When I started at the alternative school, just the alternative school, I was asked the same thing, and I think maybe Laura and Corey could vouch for this, but we have fewer instances of physical problems than traditional schools. And if you want your child to be welcomed and not bullied, send them to an alternative school.
It goes with your point too, about it's not just the kid that got in trouble. It's kids that have never fit in. And so some of those students, yes, they come to us because they've committed a crime, but a lot of times they've committed a crime because one, they can't read, they can't write, they're feeling completely defeated, and without the critical thinking skills, there's no consequential thinking, so they've made a poor choice. And some of those poor choices are there because of their lack of academics, and some of it is because of the lack of adults in their life that are positive for them.
I had more problems in 30 days of summer school at Century High School dealing with students running around the hallways, not my science students, just other kids that were in the building than I had in the entire school year at South Central.
What percentage of students that are sent to YCC or an alternative school are students with special needs or
It's a great question. If you couldn't hear, her question was, how many students do you serve that are on special education? Our school year this year was a complete flurry. You'll see in the handouts that I sent out that this school year was up with the oil field and the different things. As adults go into incarceration, it follows us by about 6 to 8 months, and then our student population increases. So this year we were as low as 32% of our population on YCC's campus, and we were as high as 54% at one point in time. I think the most interesting piece about the special education question, though, is that, like in your schools, but maybe I'm not sure if the information is getting disseminated to your areas, is that most of those students have an increase in a second diagnoses. There's a secondary disability that's on there as well, and the mental health population within that same group of special ed students is alarmingly on the rise.
At South Central High School, when we did our survey, 32% of our student population said that they had been either on an IEP right at that moment or had been on an IEP at some point in their educational career. What stood out maybe a little bit more was we had 42% of our student population that had had a drug or alcohol offense where they had actually had trouble with the law. We had 34% of our student population that said that they had received treatment for drug or alcohol at some time in their lives, and 68% of our student population said they had been in for counseling for depression, anger, or family issues.
Lori.
Since we're talking alternative education, can you kind of explain either at South Central or YCC, when a student comes to class, when a teacher comes to class, what do they expect from each other? I mean, what does a typical, and I know there's no typical class, but what happens in a class at an alternative school here?
Well, at South Central in the science classroom, we run 3 blocks a day, and it used to be that you would have, like if you were Corey Volk, you would teach these 5 sciences, and you could offer those 5 sciences anytime during that block. So I could have a kid that would be doing physical science and biology and anatomy and something like that. And it really wasn't a very good situation, and we tried to narrow it down. So during this block, you could only take biology, which is a big class. It's every sophomore has to have it. So let's say you've got first block biology, and I'll be just sitting there at my desk drinking coffee, and in will walk the kids. We don't have a bell system, so they just walk in, and we just have to monitor the time. And if they're more than 10 minutes late, then they have to go get a pass, but nothing happens, so it's no big deal. But anyway, so I'll be sitting there, and I'll have 12 kids on the books, and I'm really bad with names, so I've got an active board with like stuff that's going on in my classroom, stuff that's going on in school, stuff that's going on in the calendar, and maybe a funny quote or something like that, or a joke. And then I'll also have the 12 kids up there, and then I'll have their deadlines that they have to be done by that day because they started on this day and they have 42 days to finish. So it helps me and the student know when we do goal setting when they need to be done, but it also helps me because now I've got a word bank of names, because I can't always remember what everybody's name is, especially if I haven't seen a kid in a few days. I'll be like, oh, who's that kid? Oh yeah, it's John. There we go. So then the kids will trickle in, and they've got a little cubby where they keep all their stuff, all their books, and all their work, and they'll just go get that. And once I get them sort of into the routine, I don't have to explain, because it'll take a while. A kid will come in from Bismarck Higher Century, and they'll sit down and they'll wait for the presentation. There's no presentation. You just go get your stuff and get started. Let's find out where you're at, because maybe they've got to get through a couple of bookwork things. Maybe they've got a lab. Maybe they're doing this or that. So if it's biology, I could have kids that are in first semester biology with kids that are in second semester biology at the same time. So they're not really in the same place doing the same things. If they are, if there's maybe 3 out of the 12 that are at the same place and they all need to do DNA extraction, they'll do it all together, because I don't want to set that up any more times than I have to. I just want to do it one time. But sometimes I can't do that because I've got, this really nice kid and this really nice kid, and that kid over there is not functioning well with society. I'm not going to put those 2 kids together with that kid just to save me some time and to make things more collaborative. If it's not in the best interest of those students, then I'm not going to do it. I may put these 2 together and have this one be his own separate group, or I might just have them do it at different times and say, why don't you go do that internet quiz real quick? And get them off in a different direction. So they just look to see what they've got to get done, and we do goal setting every week, and they know what needs to be done for that week, and whether they really know that they need to have it done or not, they may or not. But that's just the way it goes. That's a typical day in South Central Science.
Ours is similar, with the exception of the 10-minute thing is a big deal if they're not to their next class in 10 minutes. It's more like bell to bell. And then we're alarmed. But other than that, the one thing is, and our students say on their exits all the time, our students are at their door greeting their students, and so at every bell, they're at the door greeting their students and watching the student traffic and movement down the hallways. So of course, that's the other piece. And then you asked about rules. Ours are really simple. They have to respect others, they have to respect themselves, and they have to respect property. And so if you think about it, whatever choices you make during the day really falls into one of those caveats. And so that is truly where it needs to be with our students who are at different levels as well. We're on a block schedule, and so a lot of teachers will tend to do some chunking where they might do 30 minutes of different instruction and then bring the whole class together no matter what it is that they're working on individually and do like mugs or different things like that, a daily or a language or something, and then bring them back out and then bring them again for maybe a book trailer or something to break up the time in the day. So if you think about it, how many of you have lost it at this point because we've sat for, however early you started this morning? Our students are no different.
And I think English is a little different. Laura and I have met many times at Barnes & Noble to talk about ideas for our classroom. And both of us do more of a writing workshop, even though the kids that I get might be a 9th grader and an 11th grader and a 12th grader. They're all doing the same thing in my room pretty much, rather than just the packet and say, okay, here, read your literature book and do the packet. I like to do a little presentation. Yeah, that's fun. And we do the vocab, and we do a little writing prompt to get them going and that kind of thing too.
I can't resist mentioning 2 books that I speak partly to what some of you were just saying. I think there's the whole pedagogical side, and then there's very much the human side with all the kids that we teach. But so the books, while there's kind of an Englishy thing about it, obviously you're not all English people, so one of them is A Place to Stand by Jimmy Santiago Baca, which is a phenomenal memoir. It's really such an incredible memoir, and he was in prison for robbery, drugs, and things like that. And I think 22, still couldn't even read his own name. And he gets a letter from a guy from a jail, from a church writing, and he realizes, what am I doing, man? I'm 22, I'm in prison, I can't even read my own name. And from that moment, he kind of turns his life around, and now he's one of our most respected poets. So that's a great book. And then there's this other book called True Notebooks by Mark Salzman, who's a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. And he ended up going to the jails in Los Angeles and just wanted to get a little background information to kind of flesh out some characters about, for a novel he was writing. And there was this little nun who really you couldn't say no to, who said, "We just love you to get involved in our writing program here. And I know you're busy, so how about if you just come in maybe twice a week and work with the kids?" So these were all kids like 18 or under who were in LA County Jail who were all very serious offenders. And it's about his 2-year experience, I think, of running a writing group with them. And what you really come out of that with is the sense of, the humanity of the kids, despite the mistakes that they made. So great books.
Lori, I think we're ready for lunch.
Okay.
So let's give, especially Penny and Corey, a big round of applause for joining us today and taking time out of their schedules.